The Trojan War, a bedtime journey through ancient legend. Settle into your pillows now, and let your breathing slow. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow yourself to drift back through the mists of time, back 3,000 years, to the shores of the Aegean Sea, where bronze-clad warriors once stood beneath the Mediterranean sun, and where one of humanity's greatest stories unfolded across 10 long years of conflict and courage, love and loss, destiny and choice. The seeds of war long before the first ship ever sailed toward Troy, long before any warrior sharpened his spear or donned his helmet. The seeds of the Great War were planted at a wedding, a celebration that should have been filled only with joy, but instead became the birthplace of strife. The wedding was that of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph of extraordinary beauty and power. All the gods were invited to this grand union, all except one. Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, found herself excluded from the guest list. Perhaps the organizers thought her presence would sour the festivities. Perhaps they simply forgot. But goddesses, especially those whose very nature embodies chaos, do not take kindly to such slights. And so Eris came anyway, uninvited and unbidden. She did not cause a scene. She did not shout or rage. Instead, she did something far more insidious. Into the midst of the celebration, she tossed a golden apple, a simple fruit, but inscribed with 3 words that would change the course of history. To the fairest. Imagine the scene now as you rest comfortably in your bed. The great hall filled with immortals, their laughter and conversation suddenly falling silent as this golden apple rolls across the marble floor, glinting in the torchlight. 3 goddesses see it, and each believes, truly believes, that the apple must be meant for her. First, there was Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus himself. She was accustomed to being first among goddesses, the embodiment of majesty and power. Of course, the apple should be hers. Then there was Athena, goddess of wisdom, warfare, and craft. Gray-eyed and formidable, she had sprung fully formed from Zeus's head, born in armor. She was the goddess of strategic warfare, of civilized life, of all the arts. Surely such an apple honored her. And finally, there was Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty itself. Born from the sea foam, radiating allure and desire, she believed, as was perhaps natural, that any prize for fairness must belong to her. The 3 goddesses argued among themselves, each making her case, and soon the entire celebration was disrupted by their dispute. Zeus, wise in the ways of divine politics, knew better than to judge between his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of love. Such a choice would create enemies he could not afford. Instead, he declared that a mortal should decide someone with no stake in the divine power structures, someone who might judge more fairly. The choice fell to Paris, a prince of Troy, who lived as a shepherd on Mount Ida, tending his flocks in peaceful ignorance of his royal birth. The judgment of Paris. Let your mind drift now to those ancient mountains where the air was thin and clear, and where Paris spent his days watching over sheep and goats, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Paris was beautiful, so beautiful that he had once won a prize for his handsomeness when a bull he had raised was judged the finest at games. He was, by all accounts, a young man of considerable charm, but perhaps not the deepest wisdom. He had been raised by shepherds, having been abandoned as an infant when prophecies foretold that he would bring destruction to Troy. But prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves, no matter how one tries to avoid them. One day, as Paris rested beneath the shade of a tree, the god Hermes appeared before him, leading 3 radiant goddesses. Each was veiled, for their full glory would have been too much for mortal eyes. Hermes explained the situation. Paris must choose which goddess deserved the golden apple. Picture Paris now, This simple shepherd suddenly confronted with the most important decision in the world. Each goddess, in turn, made her offer. Hera spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of authority and power. She promised Paris dominion over all of Europe and Asia. She would make him the most powerful king in the world, ruling over vast territories, commanding countless subjects. His word would be law, his power unquestioned. It was a magnificent offer, one that would have tempted many. But Paris asked for time to consider. Then Athena approached, and her gray eyes seemed to see directly into his soul. She offered him wisdom beyond measure and skill in battle that would make him undefeatable. She would grant him glory in warfare, make him the greatest warrior the world had ever known. She would give him the wisdom to rule justly, to build civilizations, to be remembered forever as a hero among heroes. Again, a powerful temptation. But still, Paris waited. Finally, Aphrodite stepped forward, and her voice was soft as summer wind through olive groves. She offered him something simpler than power or glory: love. Not just any love, but the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. And Paris, young and perhaps foolish, perhaps simply following his heart, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. In that moment, the fate of Troy was sealed. Hera and Athena left the mountain nursing their wounded pride, and from that day forward, they would become Troy's implacable enemies. But Paris scarcely noticed. His thoughts were already turning toward Sparta, toward Helen, toward a love that would launch 1,000 ships and bring down a city. Helen of Sparta. Let us turn now to Helen herself. As you sink deeper into your pillows and let the story wash over you like gentle waves upon a shore. Helen was the daughter of Zeus, born from an egg after the king of gods came to her mother Leda in the form of a swan. She was, by all accounts, the most beautiful woman in the world, so beautiful that when she came of age, every prince and king in Greece sought her hand in marriage. Her suitors were so numerous and so powerful that her earthly father, King Tyndareus, feared that choosing one would make enemies of all the others. It was clever Odysseus who suggested a solution. All the suitors should swear an oath to defend Helen's chosen husband and her marriage, whoever she might choose. This oath, the oath of Tyndareus, would bind the greatest heroes of Greece together. Each man swore, perhaps not realizing the weight of his words, perhaps not imagining that Helen's marriage would ever need defending. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of the powerful King Agamemnon of Mycenae. Menelaus was not the strongest or the most clever of the suitors, but he was wealthy and kind, and together they ruled Sparta, and for a time they were happy. They had a daughter named Hermione, and life in the palace was peaceful and prosperous. But Aphrodite had made a promise to Paris, and the goddess of love always keeps her word. Paris came to Sparta on a diplomatic mission, claiming to seek friendship between Troy and Sparta. Menelaus, trusting and hospitable as Greek custom demanded, welcomed the Trojan prince into his home. He feasted Paris, showed him the treasures of his palace, introduced him to his beautiful wife. What happened next has been debated for 3,000 years. Did Aphrodite's magic simply overwhelm both Paris and Helen, leaving them no choice but to fall desperately in love? Did Helen go willingly, seeing in Paris an escape from a marriage that, while comfortable, lacked passion? Or was she abducted, taken against her will while Menelaus was away? The ancient sources differ. Some say Helen went willingly, abandoning her daughter and her husband for love. Others say she was seized by force. The truth, lost in the mists of time, perhaps lies somewhere between a mixture of divine compulsion and mortal choice, of desire and destiny intertwined so tightly that neither could be separated. What we know is this: When Menelaus returned home, Helen was gone. She had sailed away to Troy with Paris, taking with her much of the palace treasure. Some said her face showed regret as she looked back at the receding shores of Greece. Others said she never looked back at all. Menelaus's grief and rage were absolute. He had been betrayed not just by a guest, which was a violation of sacred hospitality, but his wife had been taken, his honor trampled. He went immediately to his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, and together they began to remind all the Greek princes and kings of their oath. The gathering storm rest easy now, and breathe slowly as we watch the greatest army the world had ever seen begin to assemble. From every corner of Greece they came, the heroes and warriors whose names would echo through the ages. Each had sworn the oath, and each honored his word, though some came more willingly than others. There was Achilles, the greatest warrior alive, son of Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, yes, the very couple whose wedding had started all of this. Achilles was young, barely more than a boy, but he was already legendary for his strength and skill. His mother knew that if he went to Troy, he would win eternal glory but die young. She tried to hide him, disguising him as a girl among the daughters of King Lycomedes. But clever Odysseus discovered him by offering gifts to the king's daughters, fabrics and jewels alongside weapons. While the girls reached for the beautiful cloth, Achilles instinctively grabbed the sword and spear, revealing his true nature. There was Ajax, towering and strong, who carried a shield like a wall, and whose strength in battle was matched only by his steadfast courage. Ajax the Great, they called him, to distinguish him from Ajax the Lesser, another warrior of the Greek forces. There was Diomedes, young but fierce, who would prove himself one of the greatest fighters in the war, second only to Achilles himself. There was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the craftiest of all the Greeks. Odysseus had actually tried to avoid the war by feigning madness, plowing his fields with an ox and donkey yoked together, sowing salt instead of seed. But when his infant son Telemachus was placed in front of the plow, Odysseus swerved to avoid him, revealing his sanity. Honor-bound, he joined the expedition, though he left behind his beloved wife Penelope and his young son, never imagining it would be 20 years before he saw them again. There was Nestor, already ancient but wise beyond measure, whose counsel would guide the Greeks throughout the war. And there was Agamemnon himself, king of Mycenae, brother of the wronged Menelaus, commander of the expedition. Agamemnon was powerful and proud, accustomed to having his way. He was a great king, but also an arrogant one, and his pride would cause problems that nearly destroyed the Greek cause. The fleet gathered at Aulis, a port on the eastern coast of Greece. More than 1,000 ships assembled there, their black hulls drawn up on the beach, their sails furled, waiting for favorable winds to carry them across the Aegean to Troy. But the winds did not come. Day after day, the fleet waited. The sea remained calm, the air still. The army grew restless. Supplies began to dwindle, and Agamemnon learned from the prophet Calchas that the winds were held back by Artemis, goddess of the hunt, whom Agamemnon had offended. The goddess demanded a terrible price for releasing the winds. Agamemnon must sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. Imagine Agamemnon's torment now as you rest in the darkness. He was a father, but he was also a king and a commander. His personal desires warred with his duty to the army, to his brother, to the oath they had all sworn. In the end, duty won. He sent word to his wife, Clytemnestra, that Iphigenia was to be married to Achilles and should come to Aulis immediately. When Iphigenia arrived, eager and happy at the prospect of such a glorious marriage, she was taken instead to the altar. Different versions of the story give different endings. In some, Artemis took pity at the last moment and substituted a deer, spiriting Iphigenia away to serve as her priestess in distant Taurus. In others, the blade fell and the girl's blood darkened the altar stones. Either way, Clytemnestra never forgave her husband. This act would poison their marriage and eventually lead to Agamemnon's own death. But that is a story for another night. The winds came. The fleet set sail. More than 1,000 ships carrying the armies of Greece across the wine-dark sea toward Troy. The city of Troylet, your breathing slow now, deep and even, as we turn our gaze toward Troy itself, that mighty city on the coast of Asia Minor. Troy was no ordinary city. It stood on a hill overlooking the plains and the sea, its walls rising high and thick, built, so legend said, by the god Poseidon himself and Apollo during a time when they served the Trojan king Laomedon. The walls were impregnable, or so it seemed. The city was rich from trade, controlling the straits between the Aegean and the Black Sea, and its treasures were legendary. The king of Troy was Priam, an old man by the time the war began, but still commanding respect and authority. He had fathered 50 sons and many daughters, and his palace was filled with family. His wife Hecuba had borne many of his children, including Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy, and Paris, who had brought Helen and war to their doorstep. When news came that a vast Greek fleet was sailing toward Troy, the city prepared for war. Some voices urged that Helen be returned, that this madness be ended before it began. But Paris refused to give her up, and Priam, perhaps seeing his son's genuine love for this Greek woman, perhaps moved by Helen's beauty and grace, perhaps simply fatalistic about destiny, supported his son's decision. Hector, oldest and noblest of Priam's sons, prepared to defend his city. Hector was everything a hero should be: brave, strong, dutiful, loving to his wife Andromache and their infant son Astyanax. He did not want this war. He knew the destruction it would bring, but he was a Trojan prince, and when war came to his doorstep, he would defend his home and family with every breath in his body. The Trojans had allies too. From throughout Asia Minor, kingdoms sent warriors to help defend Troy. There was Aeneas, son of Aphrodite herself, who would survive the war to found a new nation across the sea, Rome itself, though that story too lies in the future. There was Sarpedon, son of Zeus, who led the Lycians. There was Memnon, the Ethiopian, who would arrive later in the war leading his warriors. And then there was Helen, living in Paris's chambers, loved by him, but viewed with suspicion and even hatred by many Trojans, who saw her as the cause of all their coming suffering. Ancient sources tell us that only Priam was consistently kind to her, seeing perhaps that she was as much a victim of the gods' games as anyone else. The war begins. The Greek ships beached on the shore of Troy, and the warriors poured out, drawing their ships up onto the sand. The Trojans met them on the beaches, and the first blood of the war was shed when Protesilaus of Phyllis leaped from his ship and was immediately killed by Hector. A prophecy had said the first Greek to touch Trojan soil would die, and so it proved. The battles that followed blurred into years. This was not like modern warfare, you understand. The armies would form up on the plains before Troy, the warriors in their bronze armor gathering in their formations, spears and shields ready. Then they would charge, and the killing would begin. But not every day brought battle. Sometimes weeks would pass with only small skirmishes. The Greeks built a fortified camp around their ships, a base from which they operated. They raided the surrounding countryside for supplies, attacking Trojan allies, capturing slaves and treasure. The war became a way of life. Seasons passed, then years. Warriors on both sides became gray in the service of this conflict. Some grew weary of the fighting and questioned why they were there, so far from home. Others were consumed by the glory and bloodshed, living for the moments of battle. The ancient sources that tell us of the war skip over these years quickly, focusing on the final year of the conflict, the 10th year, when everything came to a head. But imagine those long years of grinding warfare summers, when the fighting was fierce and the dust of the plains mixed with blood, winters when both armies largely rested and repaired, springs when the fighting would begin anew, autumns when men on both sides thought longingly of home and harvests. Close your eyes now and picture it. The Greek camp, with its beached ships forming a barrier, its walls and towers, its hundreds of tents and cook fires, the sentries walking the walls at night, looking out toward Troy, whose torches glimmered in the darkness, the songs around the fires, warriors trying to remember the faces of wives and children they hadn't seen in years, and Troy itself, behind its great walls, managing somehow to hold out against the siege. The city had not fallen, but it was strained. Food had to be carefully managed. Sorties out to tend, the fields were dangerous. The weight of the siege pressed down on everyone. Both sides had suffered losses. Many heroes had fallen in individual combats or in the press of battle, but the greatest warriors remained alive. Achilles and Hector, Ajax and Paris, Diomedes and Aeneas. The war had reached a stalemate that neither side could break, until the 10th year, when Agamemnon made a terrible mistake. The wrath of Achilles breathed deeply now, in and out, as we come to one of the most pivotal moments in the entire war, the anger of Achilles, which would reshape everything. In the 10th year of the war, the Greeks raided a nearby town allied with Troy and took much plunder, including 2 beautiful captive women. One, Chryseis, was given to Agamemnon. The other, Briseis, was awarded to Achilles. But Chryseis was the daughter of Chryses, a priest of Apollo. The old priest came to the Greek camp, bearing magnificent ransom, begging for his daughter's return. The Greeks were inclined to accept it was proper to show respect to a priest, and the ransom was generous. But Agamemnon refused harshly, sending the old man away with threats. Chryses prayed to Apollo, and the god heard him. A plague fell upon the Greek camp, Apollo's arrows of disease striking down warriors day after day. The funeral pyres burned constantly, and the army began to panic. After 9 days of plague, Achilles called an assembly. The prophet Calchas, given safe conduct by Achilles, revealed that Apollo was angry because of Chryseis and would only stop the plague if she was returned to her father without ransom. Agamemnon was forced to agree, but his pride was wounded. If he had to give up his prize, he declared, he would take another, and he chose Briseis, Achilles' war prize. In that moment, Achilles' rage blazed forth like a fire. He nearly drew his sword to kill Agamemnon right there, only stopped by Athena, who appeared to him alone and urged him to restrain himself. Instead, Achilles declared that he would fight no more for the Greeks. He withdrew to his tent, taking his myrmidons with him, and refused to participate in the war. Agamemnon sent heralds to take Briseis from Achilles' tent. Achilles let them take her. They were only following orders, but his fury toward Agamemnon was absolute. That night, Achilles walked alone by the shore of the sea and called out to his mother, Thetis. She rose from the waves, and Achilles begged her to go to Zeus and ask the king of gods to give victory to the Trojans until the Greeks realized how much they needed him. Thetis, who loved her son above all things, agreed. She went to Olympus and reminded Zeus of services she had once rendered him. Zeus, reluctantly for Hera supported the Greeks and would be angry, agreed to grant the Trojans success until Achilles' honor was satisfied. The tide turns the next day. When fighting resumed, the Greeks discovered what it meant to fight without Achilles. The Trojans, emboldened, pushed forward. Hector led charge after charge, and the Greeks gave ground, falling back toward their ships. Day after day, the pattern repeated. The Trojans grew bolder, the Greeks more desperate. Heroes fell on both sides. The great warrior Diomedes was wounded. Even Odysseus took a spear thrust. Agamemnon finally realized his mistake. He sent ambassadors to Achilles' Odysseus, Ajax and Phoenix, Achilles' old tutor, bearing magnificent gifts and promises. Agamemnon would return Briseis untouched. He would give Achilles 7 cities, 20 beautiful women, countless treasures. He would even give Achilles one of his daughters in marriage, but Achilles refused. His anger was too deep, his pride too wounded. Agamemnon had dishonored him before the entire army. No amount of gifts could repair that breach. Achilles told the ambassadors he would sail home at dawn. The embassy returned with Achilles' refusal, and despair gripped the Greek camp. That night, Odysseus and Diomedes snuck into the Trojan lines on a scouting mission, killing Rhesus, a Thracian king who had just arrived to aid Troy, and stealing his magnificent horses. But this small victory did little to change the Greeks' desperate situation. The next day, the Trojans broke through the Greek fortifications and reached the ships themselves. Hector, unstoppable in his fury, seized a ship and called for fire to burn the Greek fleet. Patroclus, let yourself sink deeper into rest now as we come to one of the saddest moments of the war. Patroclus was Achilles' closest friend, his companion since boyhood. Some sources say they were cousins. Others suggest their relationship was even closer than that of brothers. Patroclus had followed Achilles to Troy, had stood by him through all the years of war, and now stayed in the tent with him during his withdrawal. But Patroclus had a gentler heart than Achilles. Watching the Greeks being slaughtered, hearing the cries of the wounded, seeing the ships burning, he could bear it no longer. He went to Achilles and begged him to either return to battle himself or, if his pride would not allow that, at least to let Patroclus lead the Myrmidons to war, wearing Achilles' famous armor. The sight of Achilles' armor, Patroclus argued, might make the Trojans think the great warrior had returned to battle, and they might fall back in fear. At the very least, the fresh Myrmidons could relieve the exhausted Greeks. Achilles, moved by his friend's plea and horrified at how close the Trojans had come to burning the ships, agreed. He dressed Patroclus in his own golden armor, gave him his spear, though not the great spear only Achilles could wield, and sent him into battle with strict instructions. Drive the Trojans from the ships, but go no further. Do not pursue them to Troy's walls. Patroclus led the Myrmidons into battle, and his appearance transformed the fight. The Trojans, seeing what they thought was Achilles, fell back in terror. Patroclus drove them from the ships across the plain, killing many warriors. He was magnificent in battle, inspired by righteous fury and the desperate need to save his comrades. But Patroclus, in the heat of battle, forgot Achilles' warning. He pursued the Trojans all the way to Troy's walls. 3 times he tried to scale them, and 3 times Apollo himself threw him back. And there, beneath the walls of Troy, the god Apollo struck Patroclus, stunning him, and Hector drove his spear through Patroclus's body. As Patroclus lay dying, Hector stripped Achilles' armor from him. The Greeks managed to recover Patroclus's body, but only after fierce fighting. They carried it back to the camp while the Trojans celebrated, believing they had killed Achilles himself. When word reached Achilles that Patroclus was dead, his grief was absolute. He fell to the ground, covering himself with ash and dirt, tearing at his hair, wailing in anguish. Thetis heard his cries and came to him, and all she could do was hold her son as he wept. All night Achilles mourned, and by dawn his grief had transformed into something else, a cold, deadly rage directed at Hector. Patroclus had died wearing Achilles' armor, fighting in Achilles' place, and it was Achilles' withdrawal that had made it all possible. The guilt and grief and rage mixed together until Achilles had only one thought. He would kill Hector, no matter the cost. But he had no armor. Hector had taken it. Thetis promised to bring him new armor, forged by Hephaestus himself, the smith of the gods. She told Achilles to wait until dawn before entering battle. Achilles agreed. But he went to the Greek ramparts and gave a great war cry. 3 times he shouted, and 3 times the Trojans fell back in terror at the sound. In the confusion, the Greeks managed to bring Patroclus' body safely within their walls. That night, on Olympus, Hephaestus worked at his forge, creating armor fit for the greatest warrior who ever lived. He made a shield decorated with scenes of the entire world, cities at peace and war, farmers harvesting, dancers celebrating, the ocean circling the rim. He made a breastplate that gleamed like fire, a helmet with a golden crest, greaves for the legs, and when it was finished, Thetis brought this divine armor to her son. The death of Hector breathed slowly now, in and out, as we approach the climax of our tale. At dawn, Achilles put on his new armor. He went to the assembly and declared his anger against Agamemnon at an end, not because he forgave him, but because grief for Patroclus outweighed all other concerns. Agamemnon offered his gifts again, and this time Achilles accepted, though he seemed barely to notice them. Briseis was returned to him, weeping for Patroclus, who had always been kind to her. Then Achilles, shining in his divine armor, led the Greeks into battle. What followed was like nothing the war had seen before. Achilles was unstoppable, a force of nature given human form. He killed every Trojan who stood against him. Warriors fled before him in terror. He drove through their ranks like a scythe through wheat, and the plain ran red with blood. He fought the river god Scamander itself when the river protested that his killing was choking its waters with corpses. He would have killed Aeneas if Poseidon had not spirited the Trojan away, preserving him for his future destiny in Italy. He fought and killed Asteropios, grandson of the river god. He slaughtered the sons of Priam, including young Polydorus and Lycaon, showing no mercy. The Trojans fled back to their city, and for the first time in years, they closed the great Scaean gates behind them, all except one. Hector remained outside, standing alone before the walls, waiting for Achilles. King Priam and Queen Hecuba stood on the walls, begging Hector to come inside, to not throw his life away. Andromache, his wife, pleaded with him, but Hector knew that this was his fate. It was his spear that had killed Patroclus. If Troy was to have any chance, someone had to face Achilles, and he was the only one who could even hope to match the Greek champion. Still, when Achilles approached, terrible in his fury, his armor blazing like fire, his spear held ready, Hector's courage faltered. He ran. 3 times Achilles chased Hector around the walls of Troy, with all the armies watching, the Trojans from their walls, the Greeks from the plain. Gods and mortals alike watched this race that would determine so much. Finally, Athena came to Hector in the guise of his brother Deiphobus, telling him she would help him fight Achilles. Thus deceived, Hector found his courage again and turned to face his enemy. The 2 greatest warriors of the war faced each other. They spoke briefly, Hector asking that whoever won would return the loser's body for proper burial, Achilles refusing, saying only that one of them would die today. They fought. Hector cast his spear first, but Athena deflected it. Achilles threw his spear and Hector dodged, but Athena returned the weapon to Achilles' hand. Hector reached for a spear from Deiphobus, only to find his brother was not there. It had been Athena's trick. In that moment, Hector knew he would die, but he faced death with courage, drawing his sword and charging. Achilles, who knew every weak point in the armor Hector wore, for it had been Achilles' own armor, taken from Patroclus, drove his spear through the single vulnerable spot at Hector's throat. As Hector lay dying, he begged again for his body to be returned to his family. Achilles refused. He stripped the armor from Hector's body, and in his rage and grief, he did something terrible. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it back to the Greek camp, around and around Patroclus's funeral barrow, desecrating the corpse. For days this continued. Each morning, Achilles would drag Hector's body around Patroclus's tomb, but the gods protected Hector's flesh from corruption, keeping it intact. In Troy, The mourning was absolute. Andromache collapsed when she saw her husband's body being dragged. Hecuba wailed. Priam aged a decade overnight. The city knew that its greatest defender was dead, and with him died much of their hope. Priam's journey. Close your eyes now, and picture an old man walking in darkness. On the 12th night after Hector's death, King Priam made a decision. Guided by the god Hermes, disguised as a young servant, the old king loaded a wagon with ransom and set out alone into the night, heading for the Greek camp. It was an act of either supreme courage or desperation. He was an enemy king walking into the camp of those who had besieged his city for 10 years. Many Greeks would have killed him gladly for the glory of it. But Priam made it to Achilles' tent undetected, thanks to Hermes' help. He entered and found Achilles there, and the old king did something that must have taken all his strength. He knelt before the man who had killed his son, and he kissed the hands that had dealt the death blow. Then Priam spoke. He asked Achilles to think of his own father, Peleus. Old now and far away, missing his son, he reminded Achilles of his own mortality, of the grief all mortals share. He begged for his son's body, offering a vast ransom, and Achilles, looking at this grieving father, seeing perhaps a reflection of his own father's future grief, wept. He wept for Patroclus, for his father whom he would never see again, for Hector, for the terrible waste of war, for the fate that bound them all. He agreed to return Hector's body. More than that, he called a truce of 12 days so that Troy could properly mourn and perform Hector's funeral rites. That night, Priam and Achilles shared a meal, these two enemies bound by grief. They looked at each other with something like respect, perhaps even understanding. Then Priam slept in Achilles' tent, and at dawn, he loaded Hector's body onto his wagon and returned to Troy. The city erupted in mourning and relief. For 12 days they prepared Hector's funeral. They built his pyre, burned his body with all honors, and placed his bones in a golden urn, burying it beneath a mound. All Troy mourned, and the laments of Andromache, Hecuba, and Helen herself echoed through the city. The Iliad, the ancient epic poem that tells this part of the story, ends here with Hector's funeral. But the war was not over. Let us continue now, gently, as your breathing deepens and sleep draws near. The death of Achilles. After the truce ended, fighting resumed. The Trojans had new allies, the Amazons, fierce warrior women led by their queen Penthesilea, and the Ethiopians led by Prince Memnon, son of Eos, goddess of the dawn. Achilles killed them both. He defeated Penthesilea in single combat, and as she died, their eyes met, and Achilles felt a strange pang of regret. Some said he felt love for her in that final moment. He killed Memnon too, in a duel that was mourned by both sides, for Memnon had been noble and brave. But Achilles' time was running short. He knew it. His mother had told him that his death would come soon after Hector's. Still, he fought on, driving the Trojans back to their walls, even daring to charge through the Scaean gates into the city itself. There, beneath the walls of Troy, Paris, whom many despised as a coward, who had caused the war but left the fighting to others, drew his bow. Guided by Apollo, the arrow flew true, striking Achilles in his heel, the one vulnerable spot on his body. The wound was mortal. The greatest warrior of the age fell, and the battle for his body was fierce. Ajax and Odysseus fought desperately to recover it, with Ajax carrying the corpse while Odysseus held off the Trojans. They brought Achilles back to the camp, where the Greeks mourned for 17 days. Thetis and her sister nymphs came from the sea to mourn. The Muses themselves sang laments. Achilles was burned on a great pyre, mixed with Patroclus's ashes as he had requested, and a huge mound was raised over them, visible far out to sea, so that sailors would remember them forever. But Achilles' death created a crisis. Who was the best of the Greeks now? Who deserved Achilles' divine armor? Ajax and Odysseus both claimed it, each arguing his case. The Greeks voted, and Odysseus won. Ajax was driven mad by grief and rage at this dishonor. In his madness, he slaughtered a flock of sheep, thinking they were the Greek leaders. When sanity returned and he realized what he had done, his shame was unbearable. The great Ajax, who had never fled from battle, who had been the bulwark of the Greeks for 10 long years, fell upon his sword and died. The Greeks mourned again, and Troy took hope. 2 of the greatest Greek heroes were dead, and still, the city had not fallen. The Trojan horse. Let your mind drift now into dream-like creativity as we come to the war's most famous stratagem. The war had lasted 10 years. A generation had grown up knowing nothing but siege and battle. Both sides were exhausted, but Troy still stood, its walls unbreached, its gates holding. Conventional warfare had reached its limit. It was Odysseus who conceived the plan, though some say the goddess Athena whispered it to him. The Greeks would build a great wooden horse as an offering to the gods, ostensibly to ensure safe passage home. The horse would be hollow, large enough to hide warriors inside. The Greek army would burn their camp and sail away, as if giving up the siege. But they would only go as far as the nearby island of Tenedos, staying hidden behind it. The Trojans, finding the Greeks gone, would hopefully bring the horse inside their city as a trophy. Then, at night, the warriors would emerge and open the gates for the main army, which would return under cover of darkness. It was a desperate plan, requiring deception and extraordinary courage from those who would hide inside the horse, trusting their lives to this fragile trick. But the Greeks were desperate, and they began to build. The horse was enormous, made of fir planks fitted together, with a hollow belly large enough for men to hide within. They built it under the direction of Epeius, a master carpenter. When it was finished, it loomed over the plain, a thing of both beauty and strangeness. The bravest warriors of the Greeks volunteered to hide inside. Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, who had recently arrived from Greece, and other sources differ on the exact number, ranging from 30 to 50 men. The rest of the Greek army broke camp, burning their shelters, and sailed away. The Trojans, watching from their walls, could scarcely believe their eyes. After 10 years, the Greeks were leaving. The war was over. They were free, or so it seemed. The fall of Troy breathed slowly now, deeply and evenly. As we approached the end, when dawn came and the Greeks were truly gone, the Trojans poured out of their city in joy and relief. They wandered through the abandoned Greek camp, picking through what had been left behind, and they found the horse. There was debate about what to do with it. Some argued it should be destroyed, burned where it stood. Cassandra, one of Priam's daughters who had the gift of prophecy but was cursed never to be believed, warned them desperately that the horse meant doom. The priest Laocoon agreed, famously saying, "I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts." To prove his point, Laocoon hurled his spear at the horse's side. It stuck there, and the hollow interior rang with a hollow sound. Had the Trojans listened to him then, everything might have been different. But Poseidon, who favored the Greeks, sent 2 great serpents from the sea. The serpents wrapped around Laocoon and his 2 sons, crushing them to death before the horrified Trojans. The Trojans took this as a sign that the gods were angry at Laocoon's skepticism, that the horse was indeed sacred. Then a Greek was found, Sinon was his name, pretending to be a deserter. He spun a convincing tale of how the Greeks had planned to sacrifice him to ensure good winds home, and he had escaped. He told them the horse was an offering to Athena, built deliberately too large to fit through Troy's gates, because the Greeks knew that if Troy took the horse within their walls, they would gain Athena's favor and become unconquerable. It was clever psychology. The Trojans, eager to claim this talisman of victory, tore down part of their own walls to bring the horse inside. That night, Troy celebrated. 10 years of siege were over. They brought out wine that had been carefully hoarded. They feasted. They danced in the streets. The city that had been on constant alert for a decade let down its guard for one single fatal night. Helen, sources tell us, walked around the horse, calling out in the voices of the Greek warriors' wives, testing whether anyone was inside. Odysseus had to restrain some of the men from answering, but they stayed silent, and eventually she went away. In the deep of night, when Troy finally slept, Sinon crept to the horse and opened it. The warriors emerged, stiff from their long confinement. They crept through the silent streets to the gates and opened them. Then they lit the signal fire. The Greek fleet, which had only sailed to Tenedos and waited there, saw the signal and returned. The army poured through the open gates into the sleeping city. What followed was massacre. The Trojans, waking to find Greek warriors in their streets, fought desperately. But they were scattered, confused, uncoordinated. House by house, street by street, the Greeks swept through the city. Priam, ancient and helpless, tried to put on armor one last time but was cut down by Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, at the altar where he had sought sanctuary. Hecuba watched her husband murdered, her city burning. The Greeks killed the men and boys of Troy, enslaving the women. Hector's infant son Astyanax was thrown from the walls. The Greeks would not leave a male heir who might someday seek revenge. Andromache, Hector's widow, was given as a slave to Neoptolemus. The city burned through the night. The great walls that had held for 10 years were torn down. The temples were looted, though when Ajax the Lesser dragged Cassandra from Athena's temple where she had sought refuge, the goddess cursed him, and he would die on his journey home. Menelaus found Helen. He had sworn to kill her for her betrayal, had spent 10 years fighting to reclaim her. But when he saw her again, sources differ on whether Aphrodite enhanced her beauty in that moment, or whether his love simply proved stronger than his anger. He could not strike the blow. He took her hand, and she would return with him to Sparta. By dawn, Troy was no more. The city that had stood for generations, whose walls had seemed eternal, was reduced to smoking ruins. The Trojan royal line was ended, the people dead or enslaved, the great gates broken, the towers fallen. The Greeks had won, but at such cost. The journey home, the war, was over. But the warriors' trials were only beginning. The Greeks, in their victory, had committed sacrilege. They had killed in temples, enslaved those who sought sanctuary, shown hubris in their triumph. The gods were not pleased. When the fleet set sail, Athena and Poseidon sent storms that scattered the ships. Many Greeks died in sight of home after surviving 10 years of war. Ajax the Lesser was shipwrecked and would have survived by clinging to a rock, but he boasted that he had escaped the sea despite the gods' wrath, and Poseidon split the rock, drowning him. Agamemnon made it home to Mycenae, but there his wife Clytemnestra, who had never forgiven him for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia, and her lover Aegisthus, murdered him in his bath. He survived Troy, only to be killed in his own palace. Menelaus and Helen were blown off course and wandered for 8 years before finally reaching Sparta, where, strangely, they lived out their lives in peace. The passion that had caused so much death, somehow transforming into a lasting, if complicated, love. And Odysseus, cleverest of the Greeks, who had devised the wooden horse and whose counsel had guided the Greeks through the war, was cursed to wander for 10 years more. His journey, filled with monsters and magic, challenges and temptations, would become its own epic tale. But that story belongs to another night. Some Trojans survived. Aeneas, protected by his mother Aphrodite and by fate itself, escaped the burning city with his father Anchises on his shoulders and his son Ascanius holding his hand. He would wander the Mediterranean, eventually reaching Italy, where his descendants would found Rome. Troy would fall, but in a sense, Troy would also endure, its legacy living on in the greatest empire the ancient world would know. Reflections. Let yourself drift now, on the edge of sleep, as we consider what this story means. The Trojan War has echoed through 3,000 years of human history. It has been told and retold, interpreted and reinterpreted. Homer sang it in the Iliad and Odyssey. Greek tragedians made plays of its episodes. Roman poets continued the story. Medieval Europeans claimed descent from Trojan refugees. Every generation has found something in this ancient tale that speaks to them. Perhaps it endures because it is, at its heart, a deeply human story. Yes, gods and goddesses meddle in the affairs of mortals. Yes, the heroes perform superhuman feats, but the emotions are recognizable across the millennia. Achilles' grief for Patroclus, Hector's love for his family, Priam's desperate courage in pleading for his son's body, Andromache's mourning, Helen's regret. These are feelings we understand. The war also asks questions that have no easy answers. Was Helen wrong to leave with Paris? Was she victim or villain, or something more complex, a human being caught between divine compulsion and personal desire? Were the Greeks right to prosecute a 10-year war over one woman, or was it really about honor, about sacred oaths, about the balance of power in the ancient world? Was Achilles a hero or a monster? He was the greatest warrior, brave beyond measure, capable of tremendous love and loyalty. But he was also prideful, wrathful, capable of dishonoring a dead enemy's corpse. Can we be both simultaneously? What about Hector? He was fighting to defend his city, his family. He killed Patroclus, yes, but in fair combat during war. Did he deserve his death, the dragging of his corpse? Or was he the most admirable figure in the war, a good man trying to do his duty in an impossible situation? The story of Troy reminds us that war, even when glorified in epic poetry, is tragedy. The Iliad, our most detailed source, does not really glorify war despite being filled with battle scenes. It shows us the waste of it, young men dying far from home, families destroyed, cities razed. Homer makes us care for warriors on both sides, shows us the humanity of Greeks and Trojans alike. Perhaps that is why, 3,000 years later, we still tell this story. Not because we glorify war, but because we recognize the cost of it. Not because we admire the violence, but because we see the humanity in those who endure it. The ruins of Troy, or what might be Troy, stand still on the coast of modern Turkey. Archaeologists have excavated layer upon layer of ancient cities built one atop another. There was a city there in the Bronze Age, roughly when the Trojan War would have occurred. There is evidence of destruction, of siege. Whether this was Homer's Troy, whether the specific events of the war happened as told, we cannot know for certain. But in another sense, it doesn't matter. The story of Troy is true in a deeper way than mere historical fact. It is true to human experience, true to the complexities of honor and love, duty and desire, glory and grief. As you drift towards sleep now, let the images of this ancient war fade gently. See the Greek ships sailing away from the smoking ruins of Troy, their sails catching the morning wind. See Helen standing at the prow of Menelaus's ship, looking back at the city that had been her home, carrying within her both freedom and grief. See Andromache in chains, mourning husband and city and son. See Aeneas leading the survivors into an uncertain future that would somehow lead to a new beginning. See the plains before Troy, where once thousands fought, now empty save for the wind stirring the grass. The great burial mounds of the heroes rising like small hills The ruins of the walls, the blackened stones of the burned city, and see, somewhere in the darkness, the spirits of the fallen warriors, Greek and Trojan alike, no longer enemies, no longer divided by the causes they fought for, meeting in whatever place heroes go after death, perhaps finally at peace, perhaps telling their stories to one another, perhaps finding that they were not so different after all. The war is over. The city has fallen. The heroes have gone to their fates, and we, thousands of years later, are left with their story. A tale of courage and catastrophe, of love and loss, of the heights to which humanity can rise and the depths to which it can fall. Rest now, and let these ancient images carry you gently into sleep. Let the voices of Homer and the other poets who told this tale over the centuries sing you into dreams. The story of Troy is ended, but it is never truly over, for as long as humans love and fight, aspire and fail, seek glory and meet fate, this tale will continue to resonate. Sleep now. The ships have all sailed home. The fires have burned out. The heroes rest in their barrows. And you, comfortable and safe in your bed, thousands of years and thousands of miles removed from those ancient battles, can let it all fade into peaceful darkness. Good night, and sleep well.